I think it's just a matter of pivoting. And you've seen businesses all across the country who have figured out how to manufacture what they were doing and turn it into what they're now doing. I spent a very little amount of time feeling sorry for myself and was like, okay, how am I going to use this time to my advantage? How am I going to use this time to my advantage?
Caution. Listening to this podcast may motivate you to make positive changes in your life, identify ways to accelerate your career trajectory, and develop a path towards financial freedom. This is the Career Meets World podcast, and I'm your host, Edward Gorbis. And I've spent the last 10 years focused on helping thousands of people advance their career while in parallel teaching a secret recipe to reach financial independence. And I'm here to share the untold stories of successful people and teach thousands of listeners how to develop a growth mindset. Our minds are malleable, and everyone has the power to change their mindset through perseverance, dedication, and a passion for learning. So if you're ready to skyrocket your business and financial literacy, turn up the volume and let's dive right in. This is the Career Meets World podcast. Today, we are spicing things up and chatting with one of my favorite high energy human beings. She's a positive force in this world, and her name is Victoria Brown. Victoria is an Under Armour athlete, a SoulCycle instructor, and a mindset coach in New York City. And before she clipped in at SoulCycle and ultimately climbed her way to the top, Victoria went through a variety of different setbacks. But instead of flailing in self-defeat, she celebrated her setbacks, strengthened her growth mindset, and persevered through adversity. And today, she shares her early journey of going to Los Angeles with the hopes of becoming a host, how SoulCycle changed her life and transformed her, and why Under Armour ultimately selected her as an athlete ambassador. Victoria, welcome to the show. Good morning, good afternoon. It is so great to have you on today.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here and to catch up and have this conversation with you. So thanks for having me.
Of course, such a pleasure. And I particularly was interested in connecting with you to really provide a different perspective to our audience and share your story through life, talk about what you're doing, talk about how you've grown to become who you are. You are an Under Armour athlete. You are an incredible SoulCycle instructor. You're a mindset coach. There's so many different things that I want to learn about what you've done in your life and how you've gotten there. And to really get us started, I want to understand a little bit about how you got to be so hyper-focused around mindset, and what is it about your journey through life that sparked that movement for you?
It started for me at a very, very early age. I've always been, now today I'm super fascinated with the way that the brain works, the way that the mind works, specifically with athletes. That's like my biggest obsession, is like what makes an athlete great, right? The greats, the GOATs, the greatest of all time, Tom Brady, Kobe Bryant, like what makes them, like Serena Williams, what makes them different from everyone else, and why did they succeed, and why did they go further than anyone else, right? And to me, it's not necessarily athletic ability. I think the difference is mind. So for me, it started at a super, super young age. We all deal with death in the family and loss and things that are hard and difficult. So I guess with your first question, we'll just dive in pretty deep right here.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so I was in third grade, and we lost my aunt in a plane crash, and she was only 19 years old. So I went on my grandmother. I went with her on her healing process, through her healing journey, if you will. And so when most kids were, playing video games or what have you, like my grandmother was reading me, instead of bedtime stories, it was Dr. Phil and Oprah. And the first book that we read together, cover to cover, was The Power of Positive Thinking for Young People. I kid you not, I can't make this up. So, I learned a lot about gratitude at a very young age. I was in third grade when this happened. And so I think at the time, I always say now, looking back on it, I had no idea how that would affect me later on in my life. And the way that my grandma spoke and the way that she went through her healing process. I felt like at the time, a lot of that was going in one ear and out the other, but clearly a lot of that kind of stuck around and has stayed with me now. And so it's no surprise to me that so much of what I do in my life revolves around mindset, because I was setting an important mindset from a very young age when people just aren't thinking about that.
It's so interesting that when we're really young, there's micro moments that happen that we have no idea what's going on in that moment that have such a tremendous impact on us later down in our lives. And it sounds like your grandmother going through her personal healing process ended up having such a positive influence on who you are today.
Right.
After that happened, what did you think you wanted to do with your life? Or not necessarily right after you went through that healing process with your grandmother, but as you started growing up, we all have aspirations on what we want to do. What was your vision of what life was going to look like?
I remember when I was a kid, I was super obsessed with Katie Couric. I loved watching Katie Couric on the Today Show. And it was something about the way she interviewed people, the way she made people feel, the way that she, when she spoke to people, it felt like they just wanted to open up around her. And she was just like so incredibly charismatic. And I just remember my mom getting ready for work in the morning, and I would sit on her bed while she was getting ready, and we would watch the Today Show together. And for some reason, just as like a little girl, I like super fell in love with her. And so I wanted to grow up and be just like her. So that my earliest memory of like what I wanted to be when I grew up was always a TV host, and I wanted to be like Katie Couric. And so that changed and evolved as, I got older. And so at a certain point, I moved out to LA, lived there for 5.5 years, and I was pursuing hosting. And then I was like, I've always been an athlete all my life. Maybe I was working at the front desk at SoulCycle. I was like, maybe I'll transition into working as an instructor. And maybe I could make just a little bit, I could elevate how much money I was bringing in. Every month I would be making more money, but it would still be a flexible schedule. And so I could still go after the hosting thing. And then a funny thing happened, because I wasn't one of those people that was like very obsessed with becoming a SoulCycle instructor. Like there's a lot of those people, and I was not one of them. I sort of decided on a whim the day of the audition. I was just like, maybe I'll try this, And so I happened to get into the program, probably because I was working at the front desk at the time. And so I was pretty comfortable in the space. And that probably had a lot to do with it, I would say, because I auditioned in the same studio that I worked at. So I went from the front desk and I walked a few feet into the studio, and I was like, okay, I've been here a million times. I've ridden this podium a million times. I've been in this room a million times. I'm comfortable here. This is like my home. I've been working here for 2 years. So it was an easy transition in that way. So I got into the program, and I remember showing up to the training, and I get to mic up every day. And it's essentially like I'm hosting a show every day, sometimes multiple times a day. And so it was like something clicked inside of me that had nothing in my life had ever felt more right. Like I knew I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And it's funny because hindsight is always 20/20, right? And I look back and I'm like, I know that had I been in a traditional hosting role, it wouldn't have brought me joy in the same way, because I don't know that role allows you to help people or become the best part of someone's day or change the course of someone's day just by what you say. And a lot of times you have to fake it in the hosting world and do interviews you don't want to do, or talk to people where you don't necessarily feel engaged with their story. And so, yeah.
Definitely engaged with your story. I can assure you of that. I often say, especially in the corporate world, if you're doing any sort of presentation, it's super important to spend time in that room, prepare in that room, be comfortable in that setting. And that was clearly the case for you. You had kind of absorbed everything that was going on through osmosis at SoulCycle, working at the front desk, and then realized I need to take my life to that next step. You used a lot of your internal skill sets, and I've been talking a lot about this concept of alignment and making sure that we're aligned with what our true passions are, our ambitions, kind of our destiny in life. And it seems like for you, you had connected the dots really quickly there.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I'm curious, just beyond that, you hopped on the bike, literally, you
Mm,
did this
yeah.
path, and now you have become an inspiration to so many different people. You're fairly well known in the SoulCycle community. And I'm just curious, what did taking that leap of faith into becoming a SoulCycle instructor really do for you? And how did it empower you to take that next step in life?
I would say that the leap of faith, I can't speak from that moment and then what happened in front of it without going backwards. And so leading up to that point, I had been working. I had two jobs. Actually, I had three jobs at a certain point in LA. I was juggling three jobs. So I was working at a restaurant, a waitress at a restaurant. I was a shot girl at a nightclub. That did not last long because I cannot stay up late. I just physically cannot do it. Like, I am not a night owl. So that did not last long. But I was a shot girl at a nightclub for a hot second, and then while also working at SoulCycle. So as I said, the shot girl thing did not last long. This is my early 20s. And then so I was juggling being a waitress and working at the front desk at SoulCycle. And this is a crazy story. I was fired from the waitressing job. So, at the time it was like, I knew it was going to be the best, worst thing that ever happened to me, right? Because everything, I feel like, is right when it feels like the world is crashing down on you and it feels like everything you knew is all of a sudden changing, or you lost something that you really loved or something that was your identity. It can be so difficult and so challenging and so scary, but you generally speaking, and it takes some time, but it's always the best thing that ever happens because it propels you into something better and something different. And so I had been working at this specific restaurant for 6.5 years. And this is to make a very long story short, they had implemented a new protocol. They have like secret shoppers that come in, right? And so they had come in, and in California, the labor laws are super strict. And so I had to leave to go. Once you're there for 6 hours, you have to go on your break. So I leave the building completely for a half an hour. I'm not even in the building. And so if you had gotten a secret shopper and you scored below a certain percentage, you were immediately terminated. So I show up on a Saturday morning and they're like, hey, we have to talk to you. And they're like, here's your secret shop. You scored like a 50% or something, like horrible, like abysmal. And I'm like, that's impossible. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, there's just no way this happened. And so I was actually able to prove through timestamps on a receipt that I wasn't even there. The person, they like have breakers who come in and watch your section. So I wasn't even there. I wasn't even in the building when it happened. So I was able to prove that, but I don't know, they weren't able to give me my job back because they'd already let me go. Anyways, so I was just at SoulCycle only. And I knew that I needed a transition. I was, in my early 20s, moving to my mid 20s. And I knew that like the restaurant thing was not going to serve me long term. And so I knew that I had to make some kind of pivot, right? So when that happens, it took me a while. And it does. And I think that's the most frustrating thing for most people when they find themselves in that space in between where they are and where they want to be when they're not sure where they want to be, right? That's the most frustrating space for everyone. It's so frustrating because you're so hard on yourself in that interim, right? And I would say that it's also like the most beautiful place to be. And the best thing to do is to just not try and force it, but to just get really quiet with yourself and ask yourself, like, what are the things that actually bring me joy? What are the things that I'm really, really good at, like innately just good at? And so you start to like interview yourself really and get to know yourself better. And so that's what I did in that time. And then it just made sense to me to like try that out, because at the time I was just like, let me try on a bunch of different things. And what I talk to my clients about a lot is like, it's like trying on a sweatshirt, right? You got to find the one that fits perfect and like feels cozy and feels right. And usually when you find it,
It's a beautiful story and quite an inspiring one that triggers a lot of different and unique thoughts, where oftentimes many people have gone through layoffs. It doesn't matter if it's from a restaurant job, a corporate job.
And so many people in America are experiencing that right now and all over the world.
Exactly. And oftentimes we see the headlines, the statistics. There's 43 million people unemployed across the US right now. Those numbers are ballooning in other countries as well. So it's important that we speak and acknowledge that as well. But as you mentioned, there's this interesting inflection moment that happens right when we get laid off. We go through every stage of grief. Oftentimes people kind of have to rely on either their family, their friends to figure out that next step in life. Who was really there to support you through that process as you figured out, I want to pursue kind of this next step in my journey? Obviously, there's a lot of noise in that moment and we're battling our own thoughts. As you mentioned, it's super, super critical to think through what we value and then hit that next step and next stride in our lives. But who's there to really support you through that process?
I was thinking about my answer as you were asking that, who was there? And I don't know that I have the most eloquent, beautiful response to that, because there's, people are the people I surround myself with. They're incredible cheerleaders and mentors, and they're going to support whatever I go after. But at a certain point, people, you have to be in the knowing, right? You have to be in your own space. And so I would argue that what I leaned on more than anything was getting closer to myself. And so what that meant was, riding a bicycle in a dark room where I don't talk to anybody, and I just internalize what I'm going through and what I'm needing and what I'm experiencing. And that process looks so different for everyone. And I can't stress that enough, because you'll look at someone else's journey and say, okay, well, then I should go to SoulCycle and I should ride a bike in a dark room and I can figure it out. It might look different. It might look like quiet meditation. It might look like, whoever you find, your at-home workout person that you're on Zoom with or whatever. Or it's maybe you need to go outside and play some basketball. It's going to look different for everyone. But I think it's really, really getting quiet and internalizing and becoming your own mentor, because everyone has that power within us. And so I would argue that the smartest thing to do when you feel like you find yourself in that in-between moment is not actually to rely on all of your friends and all of your family's opinions, and instead don't ask them at all.
So
you don't necessarily
sit in
need
silence, essentially.
Yeah, because so often as human beings, when things are uncomfortable, we head for the hills. We run as far away from the thing that is uncomfortable. So you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life. You're trying to figure out what your next step is. And that feels uncomfortable. And so we want to do everything we can to come out of that, straitjacket and break free of that uncomfortability. What really that is doing is just adding distraction all over the place. And we as human beings love to grasp on to anything that will distract us from the thing that's actually happening. So I cannot stress enough the importance of clearing out distractions, finding focus, internalizing your own thought process, and really getting crystal clear about what it is that you actually want in your life and the things that will bring you joy and fulfillment in your life. And I think that is the secret sauce. Instead of running away from the things that are uncomfortable, instead try and run right towards them.
Absolutely. Introspection is something that took me a very, very long time to figure out. And we all have a different upbringing. I'll be very blunt and honest. Some people have that family support that's very intimate, and that's what I had, especially being an only child. But there's a flip side where individuals grow up relying on their own internal energy to really propel them through life. And it doesn't matter how you grow up. Ultimately, we have to align ourselves with what's in our core and then use that energy to, again, propel ourselves forward. So that's what you ultimately did. It sounds like that was the right course for you. And it's kind of ballooned into this beautiful journey beyond that, and has enabled you to accomplish so much more. I don't want to lose focus on the fact that that was a very challenging moment in your life, but you overcame that. You have done so much. You moved on from LA, and now you're in New York. You are continuing that SoulCycle journey. Obviously, it's been put a little bit on pause from a COVID perspective, but
oh no, I'm full speed ahead.
Perfect.
I'm on the Varus platform, so we're doing it. I'm shooting at home classes, and I'm in people's living rooms. So
I love that. How does that work right now? I'm just curious in terms of that transition that you've made from taking in-class workouts to at home and engaging with the audience.
It's everything that I've ever dreamt of and more. I had to beg and plead to get on this platform. I knew this opportunity was coming, and I did not sit back and just hope that they called me. No, I didn't do that. There was an audition that took place probably, gosh, almost 2 years ago now. And so this was for a pilot that they were shooting for the at-home bike. And I wanted to be a part of it so badly that I actually hired a professional videographer for my audition tape because I just wanted to be on this platform. And I did not get picked for the pilot. I did not get picked. And so I was so crushed. I was like, I just have to be a part of it. And at the time I was living in Washington, DC. And so I went up to New York City and I went to the corporate office and I had a meeting with people, had meetings with people. And I literally begged to be on this platform because I knew that it was going to be, or at least I had hoped at the time. I didn't know what it would be, but I knew what I felt in my heart was that it was going to be this perfect storm of all the things that I did in LA when I was pursuing TV hosting and what I care about most, which is helping people and mindset coaching. And I had this dream that it was going to be this merge of the two things that I love most. And it feels like that. I think there's a lot of SoulCycle instructors who can relate in the sense that something happens when you're in that room, when you're teaching in studio. There's just something happens and the experience and the energy and everything is heightened and lifted. And there's quite a few instructors who are very motivational, inspirational human beings. And, it's just you stand up sometimes for 45 minutes and it's you give this motivational talk, but that it lives in that 45 minutes and then it's gone forever. Right. And so I was just I want to reach more people and I want it to live on past that 45-minute mark. And I want it to be accessible to anyone, everywhere. And so luckily, that's what this platform provides. And so I made sure that I was on it.
I actually want to double click on that, partly because, again, going through that will and that want to do something is, again, the most important thing that we can do throughout our careers is to pursue whatever we want to accomplish. And for you, it was getting on this platform so you can empower even more people in a different yet similar setting, but you're able to reach a lot more people. Where do you think that internal drive comes from to really push and continue and persevere through initially getting a flat out no, despite putting in so much energy? What is it internally that really kicks in that next gear for Victoria to say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to pursue this?
I think, again, I keep really going back to the same point is we all have this internal compass that exists within us. And so often we deflect to the outside for our answers instead of reflecting inward and asking ourselves, what we want and what we feel and what we know. And so for me, it was just listening to my gut. I knew without a shadow of doubt that I had to be on that platform. I knew it. And I believed in myself and I was willing to fight for that. I don't know that I did anything specific to will it or turn it on because I mean, it's anything. I've always said this, that a dream will not exist within you. It just won't be there if it isn't meant for you. Why would it be there in the first place? Why would that dream exist within you? Why would you see that vision if it wasn't something that you could make happen, if it wasn't for you? And so I truly believe that if I can see it here in my mind, in my mind's eye, it's not going to be one dimensional for me, because dreams cannot be something that is not one dimensional, right? It's got to become something that you think about, then maybe you write it down, then you talk about it, and then you do it. It has to exist in as many different dimensions as it possibly can. So I think that's a trick to it too.
I think there's a famous Robin Sharma quote that goes, everything is created twice, first in the mind and then in reality.
Yeah.
So that's what propelled you. That's what enabled you to become who you are. And it's so beautiful to watch it unfold. I feel like there's so much more for you to accomplish. And within that journey, you also had this breakout moment where you ultimately became a sponsored Under Armour athlete, which is often a dream for many athletes to land a sponsorship, to go through that process. Can you unravel what that journey was like for you, how it happened, and just share that whole experience?
Yeah, of course. I am such a huge fan of Under Armour. And especially because of the way that that process unfolded and how it happened, I think even more highly of them. So yeah, I was teaching a SoulCycle class and I had no idea. I was just teaching a regular class. And afterwards, like 3 people came up to me and they're like, hey, we're so-and-so, blah, blah, blah with Under Armour. And I'm all, what? Like, what does that even mean? Like, what do you mean? Like, I didn't know they were there or scouting me or anything. I had no idea. And so when it came time to like, you know, sign a contract, there's a lot obviously that happened in between that. I went for a campus tour, et cetera. But, you know, I found out later that the woman that was there who was scouting me, she got there early. She was at the studio and I didn't know who she was. And apparently she was, you know, sitting on a bench in the front lobby and she was watching how I was just interacting in, you know, my workspace. And so as an instructor, you're not required to stand behind the front desk and help people, you know, hand riders their shoes and water and like help check them in or like answer phones. Like you're not required to do that. And so I was, and I often do. I think probably for me, it's just something that feels natural and comfortable because I used to work on the front desk for so many years that like, if I'm, you know, walking by and I see that they're super busy or slammed, like I'll always just like answer the phones for them or like grab shoes for people or whatever. And so she said she noticed that I was doing all of those front desk tasks. And that also when riders came in the door, I greeted every single person by their first name. She was like, how does she know literally every single person's name? There's 60 people in this room. How does she know everyone's name? And I do. And not only do I know their names, I know their kids' names. I know their like what they do for a living. I know like their whole entire like life story. Because I think community is like the backbone why the fitness industry like does well, or why I would argue anything does well is the community and the culture. And so those were the things that ultimately led them to the choice of wanting to sponsor me. It wasn't because I had the best abs. It wasn't because I could do the most pull-ups. I can't do a pull-up, by the way. It wasn't any of those things. It was basically, they made me feel like they chose me because of what's in my mind and the way that I treat people. And so that was the biggest thing. And when they told me that story, like, I was like, wow, like I want to go to bat for this company because they see me. They make me feel really, really incredibly seen. They like, you know, it's like a really hard thing with athletes, right? You know, a lot of companies and a lot of brands, when they rep, let's say like, you know, somebody in the NBA, like they love you during basketball season, but what about the rest of the year? Like, you know what I mean? Like, no, like as far from my standpoint, like Under Armour really is like a family, an organization that like makes you feel seen and heard and like appreciated around the clock. So that's why I love them so much. And that was like a big, breakout moment for me. And so you didn't ask me this question, but I'm going to answer it because people ask me all the time, which is people ask me, how did it happen? And for a long time, I felt like my answer was, I don't know. I didn't do anything. But I will say that it was a big dream and a big goal of mine to be wrapped by Adidas. That's what I wanted. That was like all I wanted. And so what I would do is buy all Adidas clothes. I only wore Adidas. And then I worked anytime I was shooting content for Instagram, I would wear only Adidas clothes. And in my mind's eye, I was showing Adidas, they were going to find me. I had emailed them pitch decks. I had emailed them like photos and bios and all types of things with basically no response. And then I remember everything I posted on Instagram was as if I pretended as if I were their influencer. So I just started acting as though I was already on their roster, right? To show them what I could do for them. And I guess it worked, but for a different brand. And you end up where you're supposed to be. And I totally did, because now if I could trade it for the world right now and say, oh, I can go with Adidas instead, like I would absolutely hands down turn that down. I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't do that. But you end up where you're supposed to be. And so I think it's like this idea of acting as though you've already arrived in whatever it is that you want to accomplish in your life, and whatever the goal is or the dream is, like wake up and live as if you are already there. You're already doing it. And so that's what I was doing for so long, to be hoping to be recognized, seen by Adidas. And it worked, just with a different brand.
And I'm glad you were. It's very, very important to recognize that everything you've said over the last, call it 30 minutes, is this consistent belief in yourself. You're fearless. You continuously pursue what you want to at your core. And that's what's really inspiring. And that's the hope for our audience, is to take away that it doesn't matter where you are in your journey and your career. It doesn't matter what you want to pursue, whether it's a corporate route, the entrepreneurial route, if you want to be a SoulCycle instructor, an athlete. There are so many things that we can accomplish, but it has to come from within. And you were unapologetically yourself the entire time. And you constantly pursued what you wanted. And it's funny that you wanted to be sponsored by Adidas. You did everything you could under the sun to accomplish that. But then somebody else took notice. And there's a million analogies that we can draw out of that. But what I love about that story is that you had mentioned you were sitting at the front desk at SoulCycle, just kind of minding your own business, doing your day-to-day work, maybe doing some of the things that weren't asked of you. And that's what was genuinely appreciated by the Under Armour reps. And it's so, so important. Again, I'll hammer on this, whether you are in that corporate setting or not, is that people do take notice of the small things you do when nobody is watching.
Totally.
And I've even heard the story where there have been CEOs that have sat at the front desk of larger companies just to see how candidates greet the front desk person, not knowing that it's the CEO, and that can make or break your interview. So treat people with respect, treat people with dignity, and good things will come to you. Obviously, there's an immense amount of hard work. But as you joined Under Armour and joined that family, once they welcomed you with open arms, what did you discover? What did you discover about their culture, how they look at the world as an organization, how they treat those athletes during the off season? What were some of your biggest takeaways?
My biggest takeaway across the board working with them is that they take bets, I feel like, more than anybody else. I mean, they are, you could say, the underdog in a sense, right? Because these other brands, not to say that they aren't as good, because I think they're probably better, in my personal humble opinion, non-biased opinion. But the other brands have always just been around for many, many years longer, right? But I think what they do so incredibly well is they bet on people before they hit. So there's just so many of their athletes, we have this like athlete summit that we go to once a year. And so this year they do interviews on stage with athletes all the time. And so we get to sit on these interviews, and it's like, yeah, Under Armour signed me before I was anybody, before I did this, over and over again. The story was the same with all these big time athletes. I mean, Steph Curry, and so that in the golf division, it was just across the board. It was crazy. And so it's like they have this uncanny ability, I believe, to see talent before talent has actually like hatched or hit its peak. And then I feel like they just like win. It's like then the athlete goes on to like, do this or win this or accomplish this. And it's like they hit 777. And it's like they have this uncanny ability for recognizing talent. And so because I've seen that in so many of their like bigger time athletes, it makes me want to bet on myself even harder. because I'm like, well, what did they see in me? What am I I want to be the athlete that hits for them. I want to be the one who hits 777, the one who's like, I'm working on writing a book, and that's like the hardest thing I've ever tried to do in my literal entire life. But like, it's like maybe the book comes out and it's a New York Times bestseller, and then like that blows up. Like that's the dream, right? That's the dream. And so if that happens, like, it's like, then I'm, it's like I'm the underdog who made it. I didn't have like 100,000 followers or, a million followers when they signed me, like, and I remember walking down the hallway for my campus tour, and we were on our way to a meeting room, and they were telling me like the importance that they place on micro influencers. And I think at the time I had like, oh gosh, I think I had just crossed over the 20K mark, I want to say. Maybe I was at like 25K. I'm just making this up because I really don't remember. And, they were saying like they really like think that there's a lot more power in a micro influencer, and how you talk to your communities and how people feel like they actually like have access to you versus someone who has like a million trillion followers. So they weren't going out and trying to sign the people who've already hit. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Like they were, and so who already had a big name for themselves. And across the board, like when I look at all of the other women who are on the team with me, like I see so much like potential in every single one of them. Like they're already stars. But I just see that there's like this another level that they're all going to hit. And like, I can see it across the board in everyone they've chosen. And so I don't know, I just feel like really lucky. Like I'm in good company. I don't know if that answers your question. I also love how they fight for women in sport, and the way that they shine such a gorgeous light on female athletes too. So
I was just going to say that I look at them as a community, especially within the brand world, that they definitely value empowering women, and such a critical component of what we need to do going forward. I'm going to consistently hammer home on that statement, because women athletes have done so much for the world, and it's only a rising tide right now in so many different industry, or in so many different sports. And I love to see that they're empowering women through that journey. And obviously you get to join, as you mentioned earlier, this beautiful community of humans that are probably seen as underdogs, and now have accomplished so much. Growing up in the Bay Area, I was a diehard Warriors fan, obviously still am. Watched them play through a lot of crappy seasons, but when Steph Curry was signed, he wasn't signed by the Warriors, not even by Under Armour. People had no idea who he was. They didn't really care about him. He was a scrawny kid from Davidson.
Right.
But if we tie everything we're talking about back together, he had that same mindset that maybe his grandmother or his parent instilled in them, that it's all about perseverance and hard work. And that's what he did all the time, especially when he had ankle problems. And then Under Armour signed him, right? He deeply believed that they were going to wrap their hands around him. And it seems like they did the exact same thing for you. So I'm not one to toot brands, but I definitely respect and value what Under Armour is doing. It seems like they're constantly signing these great athletes. Just more of a fun question. Who are some of the like more inspiring athletes that you've been privileged to meet through this process in joining Under Armour?
Well, I guess I would say two of my favorites. I mean, my favorite like athlete of all time, both of them, Ray Lewis and Michael Phelps. Those are like my favorite athletes of all time. I still haven't met Ray Lewis in person. I might like cry when that happens, because it will. I'm a huge Ray Lewis fan. His book is incredible. I can't wait to meet him. I haven't met him. I met Lindsey Vonn at the summit that we had in January, and she was awesome. And got to hear more about her story. Watching her HBO series was pretty epic as well. So she's just an athlete who pushes and works really hard. And then of course, Michael Phelps. I met him once because I like was at a Super Bowl one time, and I like ran into him and took a picture with him because I'm a big fan. He's a Maryland guy. I'm a Maryland girl, so I'm like, I love another Marylander. Obviously, and the greatest Olympian like of all time, of course. So yeah, those are my faves right there. Haven't met The Rock yet. So there's a lot of people on the team I still haven't met, but yeah.
It's such a dynamic community. I'm glad you got to meet so many inspiring people.
Yeah.
And I do want to acknowledge that let's shift gears a little bit, but as a kind of finance forward podcast, if we rewind your whole journey and think about it through the financial lens, because obviously, especially nowadays, people are thinking through finances more than anything. Obviously, Michael Phelps would obviously talk about mental health. I think it's very much important to talk about our personal finances and how we think about that, and that it's definitely not a linear journey for most people. It's
Totally.
very dynamic in many different ways, especially if you've gone through layoffs or some sort of difficulty through that process in, again, any type of work setting. But I'm curious to hear what your own personal relationship is like with finances, to the extent that you want to disclose it, how you think about it, what were some of those turning moments, and how did it evolve ultimately?
So when it comes to finances, I definitely have that abundance mindset. I always believe that I will always have enough, that somehow, some way, I'll figure it out. So let's see, rewind to I guess the beginning of my adulthood, if you will. So after college, I moved home for a couple of years, maybe 2 years, I think it was. And I was working in the restaurant industry for 2 years, I think it was. And I saved up I want to say the goal was $20,000 exactly was like the goal. And so to move out to the West Coast. And I think I ended up with close to like 25K that I saved every single penny, living at my parents' house, and saved every penny, working, as many days a week as I could, picking up as many double shifts as I could in the restaurant. So my parents did not help me whatsoever. I moved myself completely on my own out to LA. My dad did buy me a TV. So that was the one contribution I did not do on my own. My dad bought me a TV. So I got an apartment. I got a tiny little studio in LA, and I had all my suitcases. I have the photographs somewhere. And then there was a mattress on the floor. And then I completely had to, build it from nothing. Right. And so I went out, found a, job there, and, figured it out. So at a certain point, when I decided to do the SoulCycle route, as you know, I had been fired from the previous restaurant job, right? And then working at the front desk at SoulCycle in West Hollywood that job was a hobby. I did that because I got to ride in the classes for free, and everyone at the front desk was such a hoot. It was so fun. A lot of people know Heather McMahon. She's a pretty famous online comedian. So we worked at the front desk together, and that's how we became friends. Actors, comedians, it was so much fun working there. And so, but it didn't pay the bills. That's for damn sure. It did not pay the bills. So I didn't even I made so little there that when I got fired from the restaurant job, I could still collect unemployment. And so I did that. And then when I got into the SoulCycle training program, one of the reasons that I decided to do it was because they were doing their first ever shortened training program in LA. So it was only going to be 3 weeks. And prior to that, it was always done in New York City. So I did the shortened program. It was only 3 weeks. And at the end of the training program, they said, which yes, the training was 3 weeks, but then you have to do community rides afterwards where you do rides and they judge you or whatever. So this process ended up stretching out for 2 months. And so this whole 2 month period, you're not allowed to work at the front desk anymore. So I'm making no income really. They pay you for the training, but it's only 2 hours a day or something. It was $9 an hour or something ridiculous at the time. So this is a long story. So at the time, I'm just draining my savings at the time. And so at this point, they said to me, you can get on the schedule and start teaching classes. We'll give you 2 to 3 classes a week. And based on feedback, we'll give you more, because they didn't think that I was ready after the 3 weeks. They were like, we'll let you go teach, but we don't know how you're going to do, because we don't think based on your performance that you're ready. And so they said the other option is you can go to New York for 2 months and do the training a second time. So I'm like, So I'm allowed to go teach if I want to, but it sounds like they're not really like that confident about my ability, or I can go redo training. So they gave this option to 4 people in my program. I'm the only one who chose it. I said, I wanted them to be jazzed. I wanted them to be pumped on me. Like, so I was like, you know what, I'll do it. So I went out to New York. At this point, I'm paying rent in New York City and Los Angeles at the same time, whilst making no income. So when
you might be the only person on the planet who would have chosen to do that.
Yeah, I probably the only person on planet Earth who would choose to do something like that. So in New York, I shared a studio with another girl who was in the training program. So the rent wasn't like too crazy high, but it certainly wasn't cheap. And we shared the studio. We had like the whole, you could put your both arms out and like touch either side of the wall. And that was the whole thing, you know? It had like one of those beds that came out of the wall. And I've always been a saver. So I had quite a bit of money that was saved up before this started. But then, you know, you do a 2-month training and that took 2 months in LA. And then there was some time here in between. And then I had before the training started in New York. And then I went to New York for 2 months. So I remember getting back and I had blown through all of my savings. And I remember getting back and I was like, okay, I taught my first week of classes, but I hadn't gotten a paycheck yet. And I pulled over into the parking lot of Chipotle and I was going to get lunch. And I thought to myself, you know what, I better check my bank account before I go in there. I had $52 in there. That was it. $52. And I was like, well, I guess it's tuna fish today. So I put the car in reverse and I went back home and I ate a can of tuna fish for lunch and waited for my, first check to come in. And then I built everything up from there. But I think as far as finances go, to answer very long-windedly and tell a story at the same time, I am just a big believer in betting on myself. And so that I'll always have enough and it will work out. And so, I've spent money on training programs when I felt like I couldn't afford it, or I've spent money on things, whatever it was, to invest in myself, always. And I feel like when you're willing to invest in yourself, it comes back tenfold. Always, it comes back tenfold. And so that's been my belief, and it's also been my experience. So even when I was down and out, because that happens, sometimes to everybody, I think, most people anyway. Even when you find yourself down and out, you just figure it out, right? And nobody said it was going to be easy. But you have a choice in that moment always, to just stay there in that place and feel sorry for yourself, or strap on your boots, roll up your sleeves, and figure your shit out.
Relentless. That's the word that comes to mind to me right now, from $52 to sponsorships to building up a business now for yourself to what I will hopefully proclaim to be a future New York Times bestseller. I'm excited to read this book when it comes out. So we're back to fast forwarding to today. You're in a good spot. Hopefully you have more than $52 in your bank account. But obviously, as we all grow up and we think about finances a little bit differently, and again, I'm sure plenty of people in your classes are corporate professionals who think about finances in a lot of different ways. Let's kind of unearth what your relationship with that world is now. How do you think about it? How do you look at kind of investments? Or I'm assuming you're betting on yourself still, but beyond that, what else are you betting on this world to really set yourself up for success down the road?
Yeah, just building an online business. And what that looks like for me is, it's my experience, right? This quarantine situation, the pandemic, what we're going through as a human race right now. This is my personal experience. And I definitely want to say that up front, because it's a touchy subject and not everyone has a similar experience. But as far as my mindset goes towards what's going on in the world, and I say it's different for everyone because some people are experiencing something that is just like, I can't even fathom, right? And it's a hard time for a lot of people. But to me, it was immediately when the whole world changed. It was Darwinism. Immediately, it's survival of the fittest. And to me, what the fittest means is those who pivot, those who shift, those who are like, this is what's been working and it's no longer working. So what are we going to do now? And the space that you spend feeling sorry for yourself is always the thing that holds you back. Because whether you have $52 in your bank account, or you've got 10 screaming kids at home because they are not at school, or you lost your job, or, you know, the horrible things that are happening in the world, like this space that we spend feeling sorry for ourselves is like, that's the most detrimental time to our success and our growth and where we go and the next chapter and the next step and the evolution and transformation and all of it. So it's like, take the time. Definitely spend some time in this space feeling sorry for yourself, by all means, because you deserve that. If you want to cry about it a little bit, like definitely do that. Male, female, whoever you are, old, young, like fine. Permission absolutely granted for that. It's important to heal and to grieve, right? If you're experiencing that. But just don't stay there too long, right? And so I think it's just a matter of pivoting. And you've seen businesses all across the country who have figured out how to manufacture what they were doing and turn it into what they're now doing. I spent a very little amount of time feeling sorry for myself and was like, okay, how am I going to use this time to my advantage? How am I going to use this time to my advantage? And so I got my life coach certification in 2017, but I never had the time to do something with that. So fortunately, like that's what I did. I was like, okay, I'm finally going to lay out everything, all of my practices, my principles, my life hacks, everything that I do, my goal setting, how I get from point A to point B. And I'm going to turn that into a 3-month, 90-day program. And I'm going to share that with people. I'm going to finally package it all up and put a pretty bow on top, even though it's not always pretty because it shouldn't be. It's life. And then I'm going to share that with people. And so, I launched the Very Best Self Project, and we are coming into our final week next week of my first ever life coaching program that I did with 12 girls. And it was in my eyes, I think, a huge success. And I'm getting ready to launch my second program mid-August to end of August. And so I'll do the same thing again. And so I get to share more of what it is that I love around mindset with people who want to, take that journey with me. So that's how I've pivoted financially. And what I think the future of that is how can you take your expertise and share it with other people and bring it online.
Congrats on launching that business. First of all, it is not easy. And I'm glad nor surprised to hear that it's such a success. You constantly bet on yourself. You constantly look at ways to improve yourself. And that's the magic of how you've been able to be so successful. And I think that's, to me, at least personally, and hopefully for a lot of the listeners, that's the biggest takeaway is bet on yourself. I love the fact that you brought up Darwinism because life will always be about survival of the fittest. Mm-hmm. And how you broke that down is really important. And it's all about recognizing what's in front of you, thinking about what tools, what knowledge, what connections, everything that you have, but especially that drive within you to persevere, to overcome, to go through that grieving process as quickly as possible and then rebound and come out even better. And that's what you're doing now. So for people who are interested in your program, how do they learn about it? How do they find out more?
They can go to my Instagram, which is @VictoriaBrown. And then the link in my bio will have the application, or it'll tell you more page about all of the things and what it entails. And so that's going to be launching pretty soon. So anyone who is interested can fill that out. And then it should be starting the second program beginning of September.
Awesome.
So super pumped about that.
It's definitely exciting. We'll make sure everyone has all the links and access to your Instagram. That way they can connect with you. And taking all this harnessed energy right now, I do want to shift this over to our final set of questions and put you on our hot seat, a literal hot seat for a SoulCycle instructor. So are you ready, Victoria?
I am ready.
Love it. So as always, I tailor these questions specifically for the individual and want to make sure that we keep them fun and engaging. So I have 3 for you today.
Okay.
So if you imagine that SoulCycle was in every single country on the planet, mm-hmm. Which country would you want to go to right now to teach a class, and why would you go to that specific country?
I mean, my favorite place is Bali, so I guess I'll say Bali. Yeah, I mean, that's the land of the yogis, but it's just so stunningly beautiful there. So I would take SoulCycle to Bali.
Love it. That's the next stop for SoulCycle. So next question, given that you wanted to be a part of the Adidas family, I'm going to ask you kind of a polarizing question, but who's a better athlete in your mind, or who do you love the most? Kobe Bryant or Steph Curry?
Oh, man. I got to go Kobe.
Okay.
All day.
Rest in peace, Kobe. Both incredible athletes.
Yeah.
So one final one, as a life coach, as somebody who really practices to improve their mindset, what is your personal mantra when you wake up in the morning to make sure that you align yourself with the day and are able to consistently stay focused and align with your personal beliefs?
Right now, it changes all the time. Right now, my mantra, and I wrote it down yesterday because I try and choose a mantra every day. And my biggest underlying thing about everything that I do right now is I am because I did. So everything I am right now is because of everything that I've done, the action steps that I took, right? Or you can say everything that I did up until this point, right? All like the moments when you're slugging through the to-do list that you don't want to do, or you find yourself distracted and you have to bring yourself back, right? To getting your tasks done and moving forward and taking the next step in whatever it is that you want to do. And it's hard to do, right? But I am because I did. So if I don't continue to do, to stay in the doing, to stay in the action space, then I will not continue to be what I want to be or move forward towards that. It makes a lot of sense in my head. I hope that makes sense to you.
It certainly does. Such a powerful reminder as well. You survived the hot seat, no surprise. Very, very quick one today. Victoria, thank you so much for spending time with us today. You have an inspiring journey from just your grandmother to everything that you've accomplished today. There are so many useful things to extract from that and kind of propel into our own lives, but also remember that everything comes from within. We have it within us to be the best version of ourselves. So continue doing great things. I wish you the best of luck with the book, with everything that you're continuing to build with Under Armour and SoulCycle. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Career Meets World podcast. I would love to get to meet you. There are a couple of ways we can connect. You know I love my LinkedIn. Simply search for Career Meets World or Edward Gorbis and feel free to connect. Second is via Instagram at Career Meets World. And third is through our website. I have a special spot for you full of fun, free resources. All you have to do is go to careermeetsworld.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll provide you the free resources to help you boost your career and reach financial freedom. And if this podcast was helpful to you in any way, please consider rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts. This helps us help more people. Simply tap the rate with 5 stars and leave a sentence with what you liked about the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, strengthening your growth mindset is your ticket to success. I'm Edward Gorbis, and we'll catch you on next week's episode.